Good afternoon. Before we begin our Panorama session, we're going to have Dr. Smedra and Dr. Parkinson give an announcement.
Thank you. For those of you who do not know me, you're missing out. My name is Brian Parkinson, and I teach history. And I am going to be leading, along with Bill Harris, who is up here, a study abroad program to Guatemala for spring semester. We are going to go over spring break for 9 days. And we are going to offer 2 classes, one the history of Guatemala, and the other one is an international business class that focuses on fair trade business practices and sustainability. And when we get there, Bill is going to take us around, and we're going to go visit some Mayan ruins, some ancient colonial cities, and also some coffee plantations. Am I missing anything? No? And so this will be a class you take. You go sit in the class for the first half of the semester. You go to Guatemala, and then class is finished. And yeah, right? Having said that, the costs should be about $1,000, which is a sweet deal to go to Central America for about 9 days. I'm very excited. I haven't been to Guatemala. Bill has, fortunately, many times. But I've seen pictures, and it is gorgeous. I am very excited. So I will be passing out brochures in my classes and probably other classes. You will be getting those soon. All right? And if y'all have any questions about that, you can just grab me or email me. Thank you.
And I'd like to talk to you about Bulgaria, study abroad. We have a number of different programs. The Guatemala program is a spring break program. We have a program to China, Changshu Institute of Technology, which will be a Maymester. And it's going to be very affordable, probably around $2,500 for between 3.5 and 4 weeks. If you want more information, you can talk to Dr. Sarah Spear, who's the Director of Office of International Programs. She'll have more information about that soon. The other summer study abroad course I'd like to talk to you about is Bulgaria. We've done Bulgaria 3 times in the past. Last time was 2014. We have a program this year with 4 faculty offering 6 different courses, including myself, who will be offering Econ 2106, which is a requirement if you're a business major. You might want to think about that. Bulgaria is a beautiful place. We stay at the American University in Bulgaria, which is in a town called Blagoevgrad, which is 60 miles south of Sofia, the capital. It's a wonderful experience. Talk to any of the people that have gone to Bulgaria with us on this program, and they will say it was a life-changing experience. Even if you're 19 years old, you could probably take advantage of a life-changing experience. I have flyers up here that describe the program. You're welcome to take one at the end of our program, and I hope that you come along with us. Thanks.
I strongly encourage each of you to look into studying abroad. It was an awesome experience. Without further ado, welcome to the first Panorama discussion of fall 2015. My name is Sam Price, and I'm the president of the Student Government Association here at Georgia Southwestern. I will be serving as today's moderator. The panel series is a time for GSW's community members to come together to voice their opinions on topics that seem to be surrounding us daily. With help from experts in all areas, we hope that this is a time that you will engage in intellectual thoughts and conversations. In addition to being part of the Panorama series, today's discussion is a Windows to the World event. At the conclusion of this discussion, I will provide details regarding how students can receive Windows to the World credit for this event. During our first event, we discussed free and responsible speech. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression are core values of our society. In our second panorama, we found that we need not to only find our voice, but also speak up, and that our voice matters in our community. Today, we will explore the question, can we balance the needs of people, planet, and profit? However, what will help this discussion today is you. and the questions that you ask during the questions and answer portion of the event. I would like to begin by introducing our members of our panel, and then I will briefly explain the procedural details of the panel discussion. Our panelists today are Bill Harris. Bill Harris is the founder of Cafe Campesino. Through his leadership and example of Cafe Campesino has become a part of the greater movement with emphasis on social entrepreneurship, sustainability, and business by the Golden Rule. Cafe Campesino, a member of the Cooperative Coffees, is a green coffee importing cooperative committed to building and supporting fair indirect trade relationships for the benefit of small-scale farmer families, their communities, and exporting cooperatives. Cooperative coffee is about promoting transparent, fair trade and sustainable development alternatives in both North and the South, while continuing to sell the highest quality coffee on the market. Bill Harris. Lisa McGuire. Lisa McGuire graduated magna cum laude in 2013 with a Bachelor of Science degree in sociology from GSW. Immediately following, she began in her current graduate programs at Georgia State University and the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Institute at the Andrew Young School of Social Work and Public Policy, working on both graduate degrees in tandem. Since beginning these programs of study, she has focused her research on the topics of surveillance, pop culture, and affect theory, specifically including research in the effect of neoliberalism and globalization on women. Lisa McGuire. Dr. Tom Lorenz. Dr. Lorenz is an assistant professor of biology and arrived at GSW in 2013. He earned his PhD and completed his postdoc at the University of New Orleans. Dr. Lorenz focused on studying invasive fish biology. He obtains a Master's of Science from Southeastern Louisiana University, studying snake hormones and behavior. Dr. Lorenz has set up an aquatic lab with 3 1,600-gallon ponds, a dozen 100-gallon cattle tanks, and 20 20-gallon aquariums. While at GSW, his research has largely been done on the invasive painted crayfish and how it is affecting our native muckily crayfish. Dr. Lorenz. Dr. Smedra. Upon completion of the doctorate in agriculture economics at the University of Georgia, Philip Smedra worked hard as an economic analyst of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service in Washington, D.C. He served as a Peace Corps volunteer assisting the Moroccan Ministry of Agriculture in establishing a market-based grain distribution system. He was a senior lecturer at the University of the South Pacific in Suva, Fiji for 4 years, where his research interests turned toward the public health issues afflicting the people of developing world. He also was a visiting professor at the American University in Bulgaria during 2006 and 2007 academic year. His most recent research project deals with improving diabetes education in a rural population in Fiji. He has been at GSW since 2001. Dr. Smedra. And last but not least, Dr. Susan Connor. Dr. Connor began at GSW this fall. She received her PhD in 2012 from New Mexico State University and taught at the American University in Dubai and the University of Northern Colorado. Her research interest includes social marketing, sustainability, ethics, and consumer behavior. Dr. Connor. Each panelist has been asked to prepare opening remarks on their area of expertise, and each panelist will be given up to 10 minutes to deliver those remarks. At the 9-minute mark, I will call time. When I call time, I would ask that the panelist complete his or her current point of discussion and wrap up within 60 seconds. Once all panelists have made their opening remarks, we will transition into the question and answer portion of this discussion. During the Q&A, panelists will respond to the questions from the audience. As the moderator, my role will be to facilitate the distribution of the questions among the panelists, but I will not be responding to the questions myself. For the Q&A portion of the event, we have 2 mobile microphone attendants, Dr. McLennan and Kennedy Can. We would like to ask that anyone who has questions or comments to raise their hands, and one of our mobile microphone attendants will bring the mic to your seat. In the interest of time, we would like to ask that your questions or comments from the audience are stated within 1 minute. If you are a student, we would also like to ask that you begin by stating your name and major. If you are a faculty, staff, or a member of the community, please state your name and professional title before stating your question or comment. In addition to the Q&A, we will be live tweeting using the Twitter handle @Panorama_GSW. And we encourage you to be a part of this Twitter discussion. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be posted to the GSW YouTube page. Without further ado, let's begin with our first panelist, Bill Harris.
What do I do to?
This is your right.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. This modern technology. I'll try my best to work it. Thank y'all so much for inviting me to come over and get out of our coffee shop for the day and come over here to see y'all. I see a lot of familiar faces that I have seen down at the coffee shop downtown, and then I see a lot more faces that I've never seen in the coffee shop. Hope I'll see you over there one day. And before I get started, just want to touch on something that Phil mentioned, that going on these trips that he and Brian talked about can be a life-changing experience. That's what happened to me almost 20 years ago, and that's the story that I'm about to tell you. And I'm not going to share my opinions so much as just share with you what we do. And maybe in the Q&A we might be a little bit more opinionated, but I went on one of these trips that they were talking about, and it changed my life. So I really hope y'all will consider going overseas and going with us to Guatemala or going on one of the other trips that GSW offers. So a little bit about us. We are an organic, I'm going to be throwing a lot of terminology out at you, an organic, fair trade, shade-grown, coffee importing and roasting company, and we're based in Americus, Georgia. Coffee mecca of the world, right? How in the world did we end up in Americus? Because it's my home, and because another organization is based here, Habitat for Humanity. I guess most of you know Habitat for Humanity started here in Americus. Well, I happened to go with Habitat about 18 years ago to Guatemala to build houses. Didn't know that I was going to be building a house for a coffee farmer, but I had an experience on his farm where we had to cut down a couple of coffee trees. Farmer got mad. Farmer stopped our work on his house because he didn't want to lose 2 coffee trees. And for about an hour and a half, we had an argument in 3 languages translated from his Mayan indigenous language to Spanish to English and then back about how big this house was going to be because he didn't want to lose any more coffee trees. So it changed my life, and I just couldn't get this thought of coffee out of my mind. So I came back to America, started researching coffee, and within 6 months had purchased a container, about 40,000 pounds of coffee from Guatemala, to sell it under this new concept called fair trade. So we've been living for 18 years what we're calling a mission-based business, and what this panel is all about. This is a panel about sustainability, and it's about the 3 Ps. People, that's that farmer in Guatemala. The planet, all of the coffee that we buy is organic and shade-grown, that's the planet. And then profit. We don't get to keep doing what we do and helping farmers unless we make a profit, because the market will put us out of business. We've been a member of the Fair Trade Federation, which is a group of like-minded businesses that exclusively practice fair trade since 1999, and we only sell, as I said, organic coffee. So we're living in this world of sustainability since our inception, and I'm just so delighted to see GSW addressing this topic head on with this panel, and I want to be a part of any future discussions that we have about it. And I'll just tell you that, my opinion is business can be the most powerful force in the world for affecting positive change if it's done correctly. and for doing good, meaningful work, and for helping others, and even for curing the planet. You know, business can go down one path or it can go down another path. So obviously, I feel like we can use business for positive change, and that's what we're doing with Cafe Campesino. So, see if I can move on. I'm just going to run through a couple of slides and just give you a sense for what we do. I hope y'all can see this. A few explanations. Our name means, loosely interpreted, coffee of the small farmer, Cafe Campesino. Cafe, not as in a place, but as in a product, coffee in Spanish. Campesino is in the farmer. Fair trade, in its simplest form, means doing business by the golden rule, treating people the way that you would want to be treated if you were in their shoes. This is our friend Miguel Soy, who lives in Chahul, Guatemala. If you go with us next year, you'll get to meet Miguel. Miguel spent 6 weeks here in Americus a few years back, and we visit his community every year in Guatemala. He is our commercial contact. We buy coffee from them every year, and I hope that some of you will go and you'll get a chance to meet Miguel. So, just quickly going through the coffee process. These are what they call little soldiers up in the left corner. This is a coffee seed coming up out of the ground. So one day it'll be a plant, 3 years later. These are beautiful coffee flowers. Each one of those little white flowers turns into a coffee cherry, the red cherry. Coffee has to be hand-picked. With rare exception, you've got to pick it by hand because it doesn't all mature at the same time. Each one of those berries turns red, and as it turns red, you have to reach into the plant, twist it a quarter of a turn, and pluck it off. You have to typically walk through the coffee field 3 times during a season in order to harvest the different berries when they turn red. And I'll explain why I'm going into this kind of detail in just a sec. So then the farmer picks his cherries same day. He's got to take it back to his house and process it. This is how most of it's processed in a hand crank machine. Fruit comes out of the back of the machine. The seeds come out the front. There's 2 seeds in each one of those cherries, and it takes 2,000 of those seeds to make 1 pound of coffee. So then they have to wash those. We're washing it in a trough here, and then we have to dry it for 5 days over in the corner. And every hour you have to turn it so the sun uniformly dries the beans. And if it starts to rain, you've got to gather it up right away. And at night, you've got to gather it up so dew doesn't land on it. It'll mold if it gets wet again. Then we've got to pick through it by hand and pick out the bad beans, which we're doing in those 2 photos. Then it goes in a sack like that, and then 250 of them get stacked, typically by hand, in a container to send it to us. Coffee is considered to be the most labor-intensive crop in the world. So guess where coffee is grown? With rare exception, it's only grown in poor countries, and it's only grown and harvested by poor people. So I want to throw around a few more terms and show you some examples of some companies that are doing this kind of sustainable work, and they're being successful. This is our roasting machine. If you come down to Cafe Campesino, we can give you a tour and show you how we roast. And you may have heard of some of these companies. There are a lot of tea companies as well as coffee companies that are involved in organic and fair trade. World Centric is supplying compostable cups to a lot of organizations around the country. Emory University, for example, just exclusively started buying compostable cups from World Centric. Wholesome Sweeteners is an organic sugar company. Dr. Smoothie is a healthy smoothie mix as opposed to a chemically based smoothie mix. We stock all of these products because our mission is to supply a cafe as much as we possibly can with products that are healthy and are good for the planet, good for their customers. And why do we care so much about all of this? So just think for a sec about what are some good business reasons. There's our mission. That's the reason we exist. But there's another reason. It is actually, we find, good for our business to do this. There are so many cafes that are looking for these kinds of products for their customers, and they're creating customer loyalty by offering healthy choices rather than offering possibly the cheapest choice. So, another picture, just to show you an example of kind of how we market Cafe Campesino. We're often in the background marketing as opposed to in the front. There's a student-run coffee shop in the center of Emory's campus, and we're co-branded with the students. So the students run the shop. These are 2 farmers, Antonio and Mario, that we had in Americus last year. took them to Emory, did a presentation, took them down to the University of Florida and did a presentation. And so they were in the coffee shop for a day, employees of the coffee shop. This is on the Emory campus. Our name is up there, but this shop's called the Green Bean, and the students run it. And this is a little bit of an outdated picture of our team. A key part of what we do is we're not just trying to sell coffee. We are trying to create community. And I hope those of you that have been down to Cafe Campesino get that feeling when you walk in the door. I sure hope somebody speaks to you. And we kind of feel like, you're in business, you can just go in and treat it as 9 to 5, but you could also kind of create the world that you want to live in around that business. And that is what we try our best to do at Cafe Campesino. Okay, so I'll wrap up with, take you to one more. This is visiting Peru last year. As I said, we travel every year. We're with an indigenous community in central Peru. A few little facts about us, and I just want to make a couple of other points. A little bit more terminology. In business, there's this term called C Corp. Most public corporations are C corporations. Well, there's a rapidly growing different form of corporation called a B Corp. C stands for corporation, B Corp stands for benefit corporation. 26 of the Inc. magazine 500 fastest growing companies in the country are B Corps. And what that means is their shareholders know when they invest in them that there's more to this company than just trying to make a profit for the shareholder. So it's a newly evolving form of business that embraces sustainability and makes it, from a shareholder standpoint, okay. The shareholder knows that this business doesn't exist solely to make money. And that, for me, is a great evolution in the world of business, and hopefully proves this point that we talked about earlier, that business can be used as a force of good. Look forward to y'all's questions in a little while.
Good afternoon. I have a slightly different perspective on this whole thing. I'm not coming at it from business. It's women's studies and kind of the effects of globalization on women. So globalization has been described as a time-space compression in which communication, banking, and travel are faster than ever. It's a liquefying process of national borders and policies as more companies relocate their business to other countries in search of tax breaks and cheap labor, and cultural aggression as foreign businesses impact local policies and cultural practices. I have a couple of key terms that can help us understand a little bit more about that. The first one is neoliberalism, and it's a term that refers to an ideology designed to bolster the economy of a country and is inclusive of such actions and ideals as the privatization of industry and utilities, the illusory idea of less government involvement, government deregulation of everything, price control, safety standards, anything that could potentially reduce profits, private property ownership, reduction of publicly funded social services such as education, road maintenance, water supply, etc., the commercialization of everything, and especially the idea of individualism. You can be or do anything if you work hard enough. This is your personal responsibility. If you are poor, that's your own fault. Neoliberalism came from a devolution of a term called liberalism. That's a philosophy that individual governments and societies are byproducts and tools of individuals and are meant to serve an individual's best interests. The government, therefore, should protect individual liberties but not threaten them by wielding too much power. A strong central government limited by a system of checks and balances is the best. During the Great Depression, John Dewey incorporated these ideas in his writings, and he proposed that the state should protect its citizens' liberty and use its power toward equalizing the distribution of national income. Dewey was influenced by Keynesian economic policies, which refers to ideas and practices that were theorized by economist John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s era, some of which were put into practice in President Roosevelt's New Deal, namely state-generated jobs to get people into the workforce and an increase in federal government spending to stimulate the economy. Other features of Keynesian economics include full employment, large public sectors, and the tenet that the government has a responsibility to stimulate the economy in times of stagnation or recession until the market can function again properly. So Keynesian economics had advocated a concept of government that was necessitated its maintenance of the public good. That's important, remember that. But beginning in the 1970s, with national indebtedness, fiscal recession, the beginnings of the collapse of communism and socialism, the Keynesian economics and liberalism kind of slowly began to erode and became the new liberalism or neoliberalism. So neoliberalism calls for deregulations. It's designed to increase trade between nations, so they have removal of tariff standards and laws and restrictions on flows of capital. And in conjunction with deregulation, governments offer tax breaks and incentives to foreign investors in order to bring businesses in. They'll also spend millions to bail businesses out. The upshot of this is that large corporations and businesses receive benefits that keep their production costs low and their prices lower than smaller businesses can afford. And so the free market, as Mr. Harris said, can effectively shut out the small businesses and individuals. There's no protection for local businesses because they can't compete with mass-produced items, and local businesses can founder, resulting in unemployment and loss of wages. And so coupled with the reduction in social support systems, many families fall below the poverty line. So another term would be the feminization of labor, which, okay, so there's a transition from Keynesian economics, which in part, remember, promoted public good, to neoliberal economics, which promotes the good of the market and a few corporations. So this produced an international requirement for cheap labor in order to maximize profits, a reduction in welfare policies, and both of these things impacted women. There was a new global assembly line that created more jobs, flexible jobs, which means low pay with no benefits, and they were mostly staffed by women, in large part due to the reduction in social services, because that meant starvation for their families. Women are generally, across cultures mostly, charged with the caretaking of the family, so they're required to secure such employment as could be found. Price increases due to structural adjustments and lack of services, such as basic things like education, created more work for women because they were required to take up the slack. They were managing smaller household budgets and greater needs. So thus, the policies contained an implicit and unspoken assumption of women's labor time, the idea that women could always and would always fill the gap created by public expenditure cuts in health and social services. The desperation to maintain a family on an ever-shrinking income led to an increase in an available supply of women willing to work for what they could get. In many of the foreign factories looking for cheap labor, women are preferred, actually, because they're seen as good labor. They're cheap because they'll work for whatever. They're docile. They don't want to make waves because they need this job. And they're dexterous. They have small hands. Chances are your tablet, iPhone, cell phone, iPad, whatever, with its tiny little circuit boards and tiny little parts inside, were assembled by women in whatever country it was produced in. So globalization is not a new phenomenon, according to some scholars. Some see it as systemic processes that have always been in place. You have the core or first world countries such as the US that enrich themselves through practicing double standard trade agreements and closed markets with peripheral countries or like third world developing countries. Some see the beginnings of globalization in the colonization of developing countries. Marxists see it as the next step of capitalism. But whatever you want to call it, globalization entails an integration of markets on a worldwide scale in tandem with some harmful policies on a worldwide scale for the economic sector. And some of these policies call for reduction of public funds for social support, neoliberalist tactics of privatization support services, foreign investments producing exports using flexible labor or disposable workers, and these workers are made to feel disposable, in fact, because they're told that, you know, no matter what, we have plenty more that can take your place, no matter how dismal the pay or the conditions are. And some of them are very dismal. Women are sometimes required to remain at the work site for long periods, sometimes for years. For example, in China, 2 years in the factory and you're done. It's built into the infrastructure of the factory. They believe that after 2 years they've used up the workers' productivity and they're let go. Another trend is surrogacy in India, wombs for rent. Women are basically having other people's children. They stay in surrogacy hostels and clinics for the duration of the pregnancy. They're married, they have families, they have children of their own that they don't see because they're trying to earn money for their family. They are paid up to like 5 years' wages, but not without some stigma attached. Another trend is that even in the US, women feel forced to work possibly in a low-wage workforce to help support their families, even if they're married or whatever they need to, incomes. So therefore, there's a domestic issue that requires someone to do childcare, elder care, housework, and there are studies that have shown some Filipino workers come over. They have families and everything, but they come to the U.S. and take care of American women's families, children, household duties, and their elders. They send money back, but they're separated from their families. So all of these have had a great effect on women and poverty. And the statistics about women in poverty, and largely due to these things that I've talked about, the reduction of social funding and whatnot, 6 out of 10 poor people are women. 4 out of 5 women that work in the low-wage workforce have high school degrees or higher. They still make 77 or maybe 78, depending on who you read, cents to every dollar that a man earns. Their wages are also affected by, they spend more time in unpaid care labor, such as child care, elder care, whatever. They're affected by pregnancy, if they have to take unpaid leave. Domestic or sexual violence, which women are more subjected to than men, can also cause unpaid leave. They could be fired or whatever because they spend too much time. And child care costs are typically borne by women. So, what to do? Maybe, as Mr. Harris said, business for positive change would be a great idea to help bail this out, because if it keeps going this way, it won't be sustainable. So I'm going to end with this quote from R. Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
All right. Let's see. Good. So as a biologist, of course, my representation is here with the planet pillar. Sort of look at the pillars we're talking about here with planet, people, and profit. The planet pillar, you're basically talking about natural resources, renewable resources, pollutants, water shortage, climate change, and any of those questions we can talk about later. My specific focus and what I've seen and experienced and been exposed to has to do with some missing points that you might think of as foundations to this actual pillar here. Specifically, conservation biology, or the importance of species, and science education. So, to give an example, just the work I've done here with this muckly crayfish or crawfish, if you will, is that this just lives in the Muckley Creek and another small creek that both flow into the Flint River. What we have is this painted crayfish that got introduced into the Flint River that's moving upstream. They're basically back down where they're going to go from state threatened probably to eventually endangered species and potentially extinct. Now, when Stephen Snyder did a great job with this article, got put in the Americus and Albany papers online, it's interesting, the first comment we got here is they both taste the same to me. Interesting comment, you can sort of delve into that a little bit. But it sort of shows, the conservation biology side, not caring about a species disappearing, on the science education side too, as far as, well, you could have been educated with a conservation biology, ecology class, as far as how there could be value to this. But it's still a fair question, and we can get back to this later. What this brings up is the value of species. We have no problem understanding the value of things that we consume, corn, rice, wheat, things that also cows, pigs, pets, dogs, horses, that's not a problem here. But we have other things that we're still understanding that have value. For example, 20% of the oxygen that we're all breathing right now comes from a species we didn't know about until 30 years ago, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about how much we think we know about the environment, about our resources out there, oxygen obviously being an important resource. Things like penicillin didn't come from a lab, they actually came from a species out there. Same thing with plants, periwinkle for leukemia, lots of plants involved with medicine. We understand this, aspirin originally coming from this as well. So you might think this can only go so far. As far as the species we have and the value, there's a couple things that we eat and care about, and medicines here, all these other species, there's got to be some that really aren't worth anything. So let's go to sort of off the tracks here and talk about something people have strong negative opinions about, not just snakes, but let's go as far as rattlesnakes here. What's the value of a rattlesnake? Now, with a lot of environmental science or herpetology or other biology classes I've talked about the value of snakes, and you can talk about a story in Vietnam where they harvested snakes for feeding and their crops got destroyed by rodents, things like that. But let's get a specific local example here we have Lyme disease spreading now. It used to be a northeast problem, it's spreading down here to the southeast. We see that where you have these canebrake or timber rattlesnakes, both the same thing, you actually see less Lyme disease. And by the way, I think canebrake might be a better mascot than what we have now. Hurricanes, coming from New Orleans, not too big on hurricanes, but anyhow, so this has a lot of interpretations as far as the value of this species. It's part of an ecosystem here where if you have all the things in part have a healthy ecosystem, you have these things under control where you don't have disease outbreaks. If you take other rodent predators out of the ecosystem that might reduce the things that carry Lyme disease, they don't have as positive an effect as this rattlesnake does. And that's interesting here. So how does that work? What are the nuanced effects of this? Well, it takes research to do that. And this is getting back to that science education where this builds up as being important to conservation biology here. You need grants to do research. They've dried up. The politicians make decisions on where grants go. Scientific literacy, if we have less of you guys out there who are scientifically literate making votes for people that make these decisions, you can see how this is a cycle here where this becomes a problem. So again, maybe this is just one sort of unusual situation here where a snake is valuable. Let's try some other things here. So, the snakes are great, gets everyone's attention, right? So, if you talk about this persecuted group of snakes, and of course, folks like myself, Dr. Harrington, other biologists here, cringe when we hear the only good snake's a dead snake. Well, here's a nice list to change some people's opinion on that. We see things, ACE inhibitors, things for blood pressure, arthritis, aches and pains from certain vipers. We see stroke treatments, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's treated by cobra venoms, certain proteins or elements of protein cobra venoms, osteoporosis, leukemia, even breast cancer. You can reduce tumor growth with part of what you get from copperheads. Another local, we only have half a dozen. We already talked about 2 of the venomous snakes locally here having a benefit for us. Maybe you just think it's a venom thing. And there's a good thing about venoms. They're nice, complex compounds that can do a lot of amazing medical things. Let's talk about constrictors, these big pythons, boas, anacondas, all those guys. Or even some of your other smaller constrictors that we have here. 50 times the amount of lipids builds up in their bloodstream after they consume prey. Their cells actually grow in size like an athlete does. Well, they don't have heart attacks, so how does this happen? Why does this happen? You can see the health benefits of studying this. Sorry, I'm wandering from the microphone. And if you'd asked me a couple years ago the value of polio, I'd say, well, it'd be nice to have this thing eradicated from the earth. That'd be a nice success story for science here. But we're seeing that polio actually is a good thing at invading our cells. Obviously, it's infectious. It's a potential tool to fight cancer. Pretty amazing that has a value. It sort of seems sacrilege in a Carter building to talk about the guinea worm maybe being preserved, because Jimmy Carter's done a great job of eliminating this painful disease, but maybe when we kill the last one, we put it in ethanol or put it in a freezer and see maybe that has some value down the road. So what do we do with this? Well, you don't want to go to the extreme, go back to the Paleolithic, just leave all these forests alone and have the subsistence living here. We can be smart. We can use our scientific biological knowledge. For example, alligators, which used to be endangered species, we can harvest them now, actually this time of year in September, because the big ones eat the small ones, and if you harvest the big ones, the small ones do fine, but it doesn't work with turtles. So snapping turtles, alligator, snapping turtles, doesn't work. You harvest them, it crashes, these things are going extinct across the southeast. So it's about being smart with this. More green space here in southwest Georgia, you might have noticed, as a biologist I've noticed, not a whole lot of state parks or federal parks here. And this agriculture brings out all these gnats that we've seen this time. More green space might mean less gnats. Also good for the rivers as far as having that green space for the banks of the rivers there. So again, the biology knowledge helps with knowing how to accomplish this, but we have this problem here with biology knowledge, and it's gotten worse over the last several decades, which is kind of sad to go in this bad direction here. So you have 40% of Americans that think the Earth is 10,000 years old or younger, and so that number or more actually has a problem with evolution. Now we're talking about not just a foundation to the pillar of the planet, we're talking about a foundation to that foundation of science here, because nothing makes sense in biology without the light of evolution. So having that not be accepted by people, and then having those people vote for things, is a problem as far as us being able to have science and have conservation biology and have the pillar of planet be something we understand and use intelligently. So we end up having congressmen with snowballs talking about climate change and they don't know anything about it. So bringing us back to the species here that I'm studying, We are finding that there are differences, if you're curious. We're definitely seeing different escape mechanisms. Really cool videos with this, I can show you some other time. Might be different dietary needs, so this different eating and being eaten might affect the food web. So escape from bass, we have shoal bass, which is a unique species to the Flint and Chattahoochee River system there. That goes extinct. How many pieces or bolts do you take from the machine before the whole machine falls apart? We don't know. And again, this takes research to do this. It gets to be sort of a broken record with scientists saying we need more research. Also, just the value of a species, kind of separate from sustainability. Maybe it just has an intrinsic value of itself. Why not just allow it to exist because it has a right to exist on its own? Always worth throwing that in there when you talk about this sort of thing. So the big takeaways I have is, as far as my background, and I can address the other issues with the climate change and things like that if you want to. Conservation is a real thing, an important part of this pillar. Scientific knowledge is critical because, again, this moves up through the system as far as voting for people that make those decisions that affect how we do these things. We need these science standards to be high, actually need them to be higher. We've been lowering them in some cases, that's a problem. And students need this exposure to the outside world. I have a 4-year-old already have this problem to deal with here with the cell phones. There's probably a couple of you looking at cell phones. Yeah, you guys are actually doing pretty good. So we need this exposure here to things like this. We do this 4-H group stuff here with Flint River Aquarium, having kids exposed. It's not just getting rid of the kids for the summer because you want to get them out of your hair. This is exposure to biology. It's not just something nice. This is an important thing where you have that connection there and understand that in later decisions in life here. So this whole idea of this planet pillar needs foundation underneath the pillar. Coming from Louisiana and swamps, again, you want to have foundation there. You don't build on the swamps unless you get deep down to the deep part of the bedrock there. So even here at GSW, we have this as well. The field biology courses get out there and get exposure to these things. And there is a real value to this. Thank you.
The question today is, can we balance the needs of people, the planet, and profit? From a business perspective, I actually think the answer is yes, as long as we make conscious decisions along the way. Sustain, defined by Merriam-Webster, is actually to provide what is needed for something or someone to exist or continue, and so on. First, I'll look at the profit from a business marketing perspective, the dollar aspect. As business people, usually the dollar we make is what we first think of when we go into business. We think, can we survive? Can we make a living? Can we build a big corporation? Can we eventually sell it off and make lots of money from the sale of that business? And of course, I do believe that an organization has to make money to stay viable. Even nonprofits have to be in the black to continue to provide the services that they're there to provide. However, in my opinion, the sustainability part of the 3 pillars, the profit portion, has almost become synonymous with the terms sustainable growth. That I have an issue with. I don't know of any businesses, there may be some, that have ever been able to have sustainable growth. I don't know that sustainable growth of any kind is actually healthy. So I think as business people, we need to refocus. Is it enough to sustain our business, to sustain our livelihoods, to sustain our communities? Are we making enough money to do those things? Or do we really need to answer to those stockholders, which drives our wanting more growth, and kind of tell them this isn't, first of all, realistic, and it's not helping anyone in the long run, except for maybe lining a few pockets. Moving on to the people, the social aspect of the 3 Ps. I believe that businesses can do a lot in this aspect. First of all, they can look at how they affect others. Internally in their companies, they can look at how they treat their employees, the work weeks they give them, the benefits they give them, hopefully stepping beyond just what's required, healthcare, vacation, retirement, those kinds of things. Hoping to give employees a reason to go to work, a reason to do a good job, No, I don't think we all have to work for places like Google that have napping pods, playrooms, and other sorts of things, even though it could be fun for a while. But I don't think every business has to do that. But I do think that businesses can look at their employees and figure out how to make their lives easier. Some companies are doing these things, but there's much more that can be done. This also involves the types of trainings you give your employees. Are you actually giving your employees the training and the tools they need to succeed? And talk about growth. Why not grow your employees from within? Looking outside the company, how companies can relate with the other businesses. There's ways you can do business. As Mr. Harris has already said, fair trade is one of those ways. They're in business, they're doing good by looking out for other people that they're doing business with, their business partners. You can also look at the way you involve your customers. Are what we doing, is it good for our customers? Yes, they might want the newest gadget. Yes, they might want that Chevy Cobalt. And it was apparently targeted to people in your age range. But are we doing good by producing products that really aren't either A, good for someone, or that can actually cause harm? And I think that doing no harm as a business is a big thing, as GM may agree this week. I also think as a business we can look outside by doing charitable things, looking out for those in our community, those less fortunate, those less educated, helping in any way we can, not just putting $1 out there, because a lot of companies say they're giving, and they put this in their annual reports and things like that, but how about their time and their energy and their focus is even on their products? So moving on to the planet aspect, the environment. For me, this relates to caring for the environment now and in the future. How? I think we need to change some business practices. First of all, greenhouse gas emissions. That's something that's been in the news for quite a while. There are companies that are actually taking action on this and are quite successful at the same time. Max, which is a hamburger company in Sweden, based in Sweden, they've now expanded. They, back in 2008, actually started carbon footprinting all of their products. They did this voluntarily, just feeling like they could do better. They've also have some other initiatives with green roofs and solar energy and that sort of thing. But once they took it one step further, they started putting the CO2 labels on all their menu items. So if you go to buy a hamburger, you can see how much carbon emissions that accounts for. They also try to source locally, which I think is a big thing for businesses to look at. Companies can also do carbon offsets. Maybe they don't have a product that they can actually tweak somehow. In 2010, the United States had almost 9 trillion pounds of plastic bottles. That's how many were used. Less than 1/3 of that was actually recycled. So just over 6 trillion pounds of plastic bottles alone went to landfills. Something needs to change. We need to work on how we package things. As a marketer, packaging is a big thing. It's a big thing that says what your product is, keeps it secure, keeps it away from theft, shoplifting, that kind of thing, keeps it safe in transit. But we need to look at these things because so much of waste is going to the landfills. We also need to look at how we're transporting our stuff, trying to source locally, if it's possible for that company. Sometimes we might just need to change the products entirely, make formulations that are safer for the environment, more natural ingredients, things that will not hurt the rivers, not hurt the air when we're using them or disposing of them. We also need to think of our products from cradle to grave or cradle to cradle. A product isn't just out your door as a business when you sell it, and hopefully your customer doesn't complain or sue you over something with it. but we actually need to look at it and think of how we're making those products. What's going to happen to that product? How can we help in getting that product back to either recycle it or reuse it to keep it going on instead of ending up in one of those landfills? We also need, in my opinion, to address planned obsolescence. Most of us in this room have a laptop. The average lifespan of a laptop now is about 3 years. We used to have washing machines, cars, etc. I had a car that went for over 400,000 miles with no major issues. Washing machines used to last 20, 25 years, refrigerators the same way. Now we're expected to buy a new model every few years. I believe that we can do better as a society. Yes, it may not go back to that sustainable growth or sustainable profits, but I think as companies we can actually do things, make our products where there's more component-based. We'll still have people working at factories because those components have to be made somewhere. We'll still need people that can put those components back together and repair them. But I do not believe that we should throw everything away. And from a marketing perspective, we're partly to blame. We can do a lot of good, but we also have a tendency to make you want something new every time you turn around, right? You have things that are working just fine, but that new model of the car comes out. That new iPhone that comes out every September, October, without fail, right? Your old iPhone's working just fine, at least for a couple years until that planned obsolescence kicks in. But it can be done differently. I think we need to focus differently. So, I also believe what's done through an organization starts with the tone set at the top of leadership and at the beginning, the inception of the company. People, profits, and planets need to be prominent in the core values, mission, and approach we take to business. And I believe that if we do that, we can actually support all three of these pillars. Thank you.
I'd like to talk about food. Not the kind of food that you're thinking about. Whoops. And I'm worried. I'm worried about our first world view of food production. And I'm worried that our approach, being concerned about industrial scale agriculture and moving toward organic and being concerned about the environment is handicapping the ability of people in the developing world to feed themselves. So that's what my little talk here is going to be about. And the worry is that the companies that provide all of these basic ingredients in food production, like fertilizers and pesticides, will hone in on what the developed world wants and forget about what the developing world needs. And the developing world needs food. In 35 years, I'll be about 114, and I probably will think about retiring from GSW. But you folks will be in your 50s and should be concerned about world population, which is projected to be 9.6 billion people by that time. 35 years is not that far away. All of that population growth is going to happen in the developing world. Most developed societies are getting older, and we don't procreate as much as folks in the developing world do. And so all of that growth is going to happen in the developing world. 70% of the population of the world 35 years from now will live in cities. Now think about what that means for agriculture. It means lots of people have left rural areas, moved to the cities, meaning there's not going to be a great deal of labor available in rural areas. Okay, so when you think about agriculture, if you take one of the ingredients of productivity away, then the other ingredients have to increase. Otherwise, productivity is not going anywhere. The amount of food that's being produced will be flat. So if labor is leaving the rural areas, then the other components need to be increased in order for there to be enough food to feed 9.6 billion people 35 years from now. The world probably will be a better place 35 years from now. We're hoping that inequality, incomes, not both nominal and real incomes will increase. People will be richer, but there's still going to be deprivation and malnutrition 35 years from now. Currently, about 1.5 billion people live in abject poverty in the world. Our population right now is about 7.2 billion people, something like that. And a good plurality of them is living in abject poverty. That probably will decrease by 2050. Maybe 1 billion people or 800 or 900 million people will be living in abject poverty, which means that they're concerned about food security. Food security means not having access to food. We don't even think about it in the developed world. We assume that, when we go to the grocery store, when we open up the refrigerator, that food will be there. Or if there's none there, if it's just some moldy bologna and some flat beer, then we can go down to the Winn-Dixie or the Walmart and buy some more stuff. But these folks that are living in the developing world don't have those benefits. It would be great if more people thought about individuals living in the developing world who are concerned about food, their next meal. So food production has to increase by 70%. United Nations, FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, predicts that the total amount of food that needs to be available in order to feed 9.6 billion people has to increase by 70%. It has to double in the developing world. How are we going to do that? Can we do it with organic agriculture or being concerned about the environment? Probably not. These folks don't have concerns that we do, about clean air and clean water. They're concerned about feeding their children and themselves. So, there's two ways to increase agricultural productivity. One is called intensification, and the other is called extensification. Extensification means you put more land into agriculture. And there's abilities to do that. There are places in sub-Saharan Africa that if we have irrigation, they can be put into agricultural production. In Latin America, we can do the same thing. But in most places, the only way to increase agricultural production is through intensification. And what that means is chemical-intensive agriculture. More fertilizers, more pesticides in order to increase productivity. That absolutely has to happen. When agriculture increases, when productivity increases, when returns to agriculture increase, that gives a bounce to the gross domestic product of the country that agriculture is working in. Most countries in the world, economies are based on agriculture. Most individuals that are living in the world, that actually turned to 51% urban, but a couple of years ago, the majority of people were living in rural areas. Their sustenance comes from agriculture. And if more resources are directed toward helping these individuals produce more effectively, then we can make some progress toward feeding the world 35 years from now. So, agricultural growth is key to economic growth and for poverty reduction. The key to improving agriculture is not to continue agriculture like this. The key to improving agriculture in the developing world is industrial-based agriculture, big agriculture, in order for these people to be fed. So, improving agricultural productivity improves these individuals' chances of having a better life. Agriculture as a driver of economic growth will diminish over time. That means as people move to the city, the importance of agriculture in economic growth is going to diminish, but it still will be, it will play a principal role in poverty reduction and hunger reduction, malnutrition reduction, which remains a significant problem in the world today. So, if in fact we increase production, it's not going to ensure food security for everybody. In order to decrease poverty in the developing world, we need other things that are applied to rural areas, like improving infrastructure. You can concentrate technology and inputs into the developing world and have farmers become more productive, but if the road system is mud or is impassable, then that produce, that increased productivity, can't get to market. And so focusing on infrastructure, safety nets for the rural poor, rural development, other kinds of rural development strategies will help developing world agriculture to improve productivity. Small-scale agriculture may benefit the environment. Absolutely. And again, there's no argument, and I'm not making an argument that it doesn't. Small-scale agriculture, environmentally friendly agriculture, is a way to almost ensure environmental quality for individuals, for these countries. But there's a trade-off between productivity and clean air and water. And many of these countries can't afford that trade-off. Many of these countries they have voted for increased productivity. And when the country becomes rich enough, then we worry about water and air quality. The Chinese have done this over the past 35 years. You know, 1.3 billion people. The government of China has focused on development and understands that focusing on industrial development and sometimes agricultural development deteriorates the environment. And so you see, how much? Oh my goodness. So you see people in Beijing wearing masks so they can breathe. Well, that's a choice that the Chinese government has made. The choice that these governments will make probably is toward more productivity and not being that concerned about environmental quality yet. When they improve their economic situation, then they can afford to be concerned about clean air and clean water. So the needs of the developing world needs modern agriculture, modern industrial-based agriculture. If we provide them with anything less, if they provide themselves with anything less, that's going to condemn the world's poor to poverty, malnutrition, and food insecurity. Thanks.
We are now entering the Q&A session, so if there's anyone who has a question, please remember to keep it to about a minute and raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you. You got a question? Oh. Question? All right.
Okay, I was taking notes, so I'm gonna try to read it. I'm sorry if I mess up on your name. It's Smedra. Okay, my question is for you.
Remember to state your name and your major.
Yeah, also. My name is Victoria Harris, and I'm an exercise science major. I understand what you were saying about how, let me get to my question. Oh yeah, how sufficient food and how we need more productivity and a more industrial, developing countries need more industrialization to make food secure. But it also being a environmental issue, which one do you think is the more important issue for 2050? Because if, the world is getting worse, the environment is getting worse, yet people are eating, which one do you feel is more important, everyone eating or,
Okay, well, I'm sorry I didn't make that point strong enough, but I think that increased agricultural productivity is more important, that people need to have food. And, we'll deal with dirty water and dirty air sometime in the future when those countries have lifted up out of poverty. So more food, and then we'll, have brains that have developed to the extent that they can, and then we'll deal with the environmental issues.
So you don't feel like it would be that worse by 2050, the environmental issues, it'll, how they say it's kind of bad now, but it's not I mean, it's bad, but, we're not smog everywhere or whatever. So do you feel like in 2050, it will still be, like, clear? Like, it won't be
If I
that-
could predict 35 years into the future, I'd probably be a rich person. I don't know. I don't know how things are going to be 35 years from now. What I do know is that if companies like Monsanto and big agricultural chemical companies focus on what the developed world needs and not on what the developing world needs, then we're condemning these individuals to poverty and malnutrition and high infant mortality rates, everything that goes along with malnutrition. So I would focus our energies toward increased agricultural productivity. And if that means industrial-based agriculture, then so be it.
I have a question. My name's Hannah, and I major in psychology. My question or comment is towards Dr. Smedra, too, because I was very strongly opposed to this, the notion that we need industrial agriculture. And I was hoping that Dr. Lawrence might back me up on this, I'm not sure. But have you considered alternatives in agriculture, things like permaculture that focus on different approaches to agriculture that don't focus on monocrops but more on perennials, and actually do intensify food production but without increased use of chemicals, but just produce more on one spot, and it's not more expensive. It just takes a different approach and possibly a different focus on different crops.
Oh, okay. Make sure this works. I can project my voice either way, but no, it's a good point. And there's two sides to this. One, there's some danger to relying on technology fixing things, and you always want to consider the human element and not leave people to have the malnutrition and the bad things happen. But you see things like Costa Rica, you see the value of the environment for them and the tourism dollars. It doesn't have to be a situation where agriculture is that paramount, but you do have native crops. For example, if you're in Africa, I don't know the species that well, but as opposed to certain cattle or goats, you have some native oryx or things like that. They do better, they grow better in that climate. You don't have to just have corn and rice and wheat for your crops. There's like you're saying, perennials, things like that do better. There's different kinds of irrigation, drip irrigation that does better than, but this isn't just third world countries. This is here. We're growing corn here in Southwest Georgia. Corn is a water hog. This isn't, well, after last night, I don't want to say this is a dry area, but there's crops that we don't exactly do in a sustainable way here. This is not just us versus them, poor countries versus rich. We're having some problems with different kinds of sustainable aspects everywhere, and there are smart ways to do this. And on some level, we're either going to do it the easy way or the hard way. It's kind of the way I negotiate with my 4-year-old. But it's going to be the easy way or the hard way. If we have the water crisis, we're going to all of a sudden see that these crops and these we're seeing this in California. We're going to see that we have to adapt. So I actually see this as a global thing, not just poor versus developed countries, to be honest. But it's a very good point that you make.
If I could say something about your point is well taken, but permaculture and different types of agriculture are very specific to different regions of the world. You can't practice different types of agriculture in places that we're, sub-Saharan Africa is different than Costa Rica. They're not going to develop any kind of tourist economy except for South Africa and places that have these big animals that people come to visit. But if we're talking about Burkina Faso or Mali or Chad, places where people are starving sometimes in some years when crops fail and rains fail, that's what we're talking about. And in those environments, chemicals are needed, and if you're concerned about the individuals living in those countries, then you have to consider the most productive I'm not really knocking industrial agriculture. It's, American agriculture, intensive chemical use has been the most productive agriculture in the world. Of course, it's, foul water tables and things like that with fertilizers and pesticides, but we deal with that. We have an agency in the government that deals with that. But we're the most productive agriculture in the world. And why shouldn't we share that technology or give that technology to countries that need it more than we do right now?
I have a question, maybe pertaining to this debate that seems a little on polar ends here that isn't really in my perspective, because we're pitting the environment against, the needs of people in third world or developing countries to eat. But the fact is we haven't looked at the cultural impact of the next 35 years. How we eat will change. I think that right now we're seeing a shift from what we eat. Now, I think by the time you're in 114, Dr. Smedra, I will certainly be in the assisted living facility and may not recognize that those things on my plate are ants or crickets. But I really do think the environment and the way culturally we've developed to eat, you're assuming that what will happen is we will continue to eat the way we do now, and therefore our environment will have to sustain that kind of eating. And I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think if you look historically at the cultural ways that people develop eating habits, there's been a lot of variation, and I think it will continue to change, and I think it will have to continue to change in ways that are environmentally sustainable, because if you mess up the environmental system, none of us are going to be eating.
You want me to say something about that, Dr. Tate?
Sure.
Yeah.
Or I'd like to, actually,
No,
I'd kind of like to
was-
hear Tom's thoughts on that.
Yeah,
because-
no, I agree. That's the easy way or the hard way thing. That's is my 4-year-old going to go use the potty? Easy way or the hard way? If I have to pick him up, then he's being difficult. We might have to get picked up and brought to the potty if we don't change the way we do certain things. It's easy to say, we can keep doing this a certain way and ask other countries to do things certain ways, and it is problematic to ask countries to do things that we didn't do. We went through all this deforestation, then we get mad at other countries doing deforestation. There is that strange stigma we have to deal with, but there's a lot of things going on here. We have political borders that aren't natural. Naturally we've had droughts and problems like this in parts of Africa, for example, as well, where people would move, and you would move to where the food was, and you can't do that now. So we have some political problems with this as well, but we do have all kinds of tricks, tilapia cultures, things like that work in different situations. It's hard to talk about this as a blanket statement, like you're saying. The sub-Saharan Africa, Costa Rica are different. Different from Papua New Guinea, different from Australia. There's going to be different solutions for different things. That's what makes this kind of a hard global discussion to have. But you have to change, and it's not, like I said, it's not just third world countries. We have to change the way we live as well. We have to look at sustainability of eating meat and dairy as well. It's going to change, like I said, the easy way or the hard way for not just third world, but for all of us. I agree.
If I could just kind of tone in, I don't agree. I think that our diets have been pretty much set for hundreds of years, and we continue to eat the same stuff that we have eaten. Agricultural research is not developing any kind of new foods for developed world or the developing world. People are continuing to eat what they've been eating and creating the same kind of environmental problems that we've been creating in the past. But we have the government that makes sure that farmers are not using pesticides in a non-sustainable manner. I don't agree with the premise that our diets are going to change in 35. They haven't changed over hundreds of years. I don't expect they'll change in the next 35. Maybe 1,000 years from now, maybe we'll all be eating food. And there'll be 1,000 in 114, but maybe we will be eating food out of, like astronauts, squeezing toothpaste into our mouths, and that'll be enough. I've been waiting for a pill to take that would cover everything, everything that you need. And we would do away with this outdated tradition of sitting down at a table and eating food. I mean, who needs that?
So, coming from New Orleans, we love to sit down and eat.
With all due respect, Phil, I think that what I heard in your presentation is very interesting, it's thought-provoking, but it's a macro perspective. And from an economist, that's what we would expect. But I think your points are looking at it, from above and, these macro trends. And I'm a practitioner working with the micro perspective. I'm working with small farmers in developing countries. And those farmers whose pictures that you showed, in my experience, don't want to move to the city. But if the government's policy is that we're going to support industrial agriculture, then they're not moving to the city, they're being forced to move to the city. And we've seen this in Mexico, we've seen it in China. So it's not a decision that they're made. They would much prefer, in my experience, to stay on the farm and to lead a sustainable life as best they could. So, and I do think that there's, we've certainly seen that in a lot of cases, this is a very viable existence for them.
Hi, Susan Bragg, History Department. I'd actually like to hear a little bit more from Mr. Harris and from Lisa McGuire on small farmers. One of the problems that we have with industrialization is that women have often been left out of the picture. And so maybe you could talk about that in the context of coffee farmers, or Lisa McGuire can talk about maybe either problems or strategies of incorporating women into farm cultures that are sustainable and supportive of local communities.
Well, I'll share a couple of thoughts. I made a note while someone was presenting that some of the happiest people that I've seen in the world are also some of the poorest people I've seen in the world. And it just strikes me every time I'm visiting some of these villages that you hear far more laughter coming from these unpaved streets and these, pathetic-looking houses. And there's just something I feel like I learn every time I see that. That from a gender perspective, most of the people that we work with who would all be considered low income and typically living in poverty, there's usually gender roles that are still in place that you might want to comment on, good, bad. But we do see that, the husband goes to the field in the morning. When the children are old enough, they go to the field. We often say in fair trade that our goal is to get the oldest daughter educated, because a lot of times in developing countries, there's still a cost even for basic education. And so the oldest male child is the first in line to actually go to school and continue going to school. So our goal is to get enough money into the household where the daughter can go to school also and have some options. But we see, these defined gender roles that still exist. But I'll just say we also see a lot of happiness still, even though we're seeing what we all recognize as being poverty.
I think, as Mr. Harris said, the defined gender roles are part of what would hamper maybe women's efforts in an agricultural situation, because, like I was saying, women are generally charged with all the child care and the keeping of the home and everything like that. However, agricultural societies do work, and there have been, part of my question was, well, then what do we do? Well, people have proposed ideas, and part of one of the ideas that's been proposed is to take urban spaces and make them green. And there's actually been, I think it was in New York City, they took a city block and just the neighborhood made it green. And the kids came in and they planted stuff, everybody planted vegetables and whatever, and they had a green space right in the middle of the city. And that's been something that's been proposed, like even now, as far as to end poverty. Why do we have a country that is as rich as we are, but we still have people in poverty in America? And that's one of the solutions that's been proposed. Another thing, I just lost that train of thought. I'm going to give this back to Bill while I think of that.
Did we address your question?
My name is Krishana Johnson. I work in the Academic Resource Center. So I would just like to hear the panelists' view on what students can do in Americas to have a more sustainable lifestyle and on our GSW campus.
I'll start it off, and I think we can all chime in on this. I think Suzanne mentioned, I think the single most effective thing you can do is buy locally. You know, if you think about supporting a local economy that recirculates money within, and you define local, it could be 20 miles, it could be 200 miles, but the idea, here's a statistic. Supposedly, 0.1% of the lettuce consumed in Georgia is grown in Georgia. Although in Georgia you can grow lettuce year-round, maybe with the exception of July, we just haven't set our farming economy up to grow lettuce, but we consume a ton of lettuce. And it's a much more sustainable way of consuming lettuce if you were to find some local lettuce and get some local lettuce farmers going. And that's kind of an example, like I was talking about earlier, of thinking about it from a micro perspective rather than a macro perspective. It may be more efficient to grow lettuce in California, which is where most of it comes from, but I think overall, 100 years from now, we would look back and say it would be better if we had learned how to grow lettuce in Georgia.
I think, besides what he said, becoming informed, making choices, looking at what you're buying, why you're buying it, where you're buying it from, what you're going to do with it when you're done using it. You know, how many times do we buy something, stick it in a closet, we may wear it once, we may never wear it. It sits there, we throw it away. We don't recycle, repurpose. There's so many things we can do with what we're buying if we have to buy things. I think just becoming more conscious and having a conscience with what we're doing, and just you're being educated. Open your ears, open your eyes, read, listen to politicians. This next year is going to be crazy. Makes me want to leave the country almost again. But see what people are saying, what they've actually done, not just what they're saying now. You're at the point in your lives where you are the future of the country. You are the ones who are going to get to implement things and make changes and make decisions that do affect people in 2050 or 2150 or 20 and on and on and on. So I think being educated is a great thing. Instead of those classes that sometimes we look at and go, oh, I'm really not interested in that, but I have to take that biology class, or world civilizations, or whatever that class is, take it and see what you can get from it and see how you can make the world better, even if it's just in Americas.
We'll take one last question.
Mike, can you hear me? So I'm Tanya Hughes. I teach photography and digital arts. I'm also the director of women's studies. So first I have just a comment, kind of going along what Lisa McGuire was saying. I'm a photographer, so I pay attention to images. So despite what Bill was saying about the gender roles and women working in the home or whatever, I'm looking at all the images and noticing that in everybody's PowerPoint presentations, the women were the ones being shown doing seriously difficult labor, like bending over. There were a couple of pictures of men too, but the vast majority of these pictures were of women. So I'm really concerned. The other thing, I kind of wanted to address this to Bill Harris. So I recently went on one of those builds, not with Habitat, with the Fuller Center, and it was to Peru. And I went as this white privileged woman from the US, right, going to do good. And what I saw when I was down there, and I was teaching ethics and international photography and challenged my students to really consider what we were doing. Because I saw we were building these very Western looking homes with brick walls and glass and a pointed roof in a desert that never gets rain. And we were closing them in where they had no circulating air, saying we were doing good. And I went in those buildings. They were way hotter than what to us seemed like the shacks, okay, to our Western eye. So it made me kind of question what we were doing. So I think that sometimes we, in our Western privilege, go over doing good when maybe we're not. So I wanted to just ask you, as a businessman who is going in doing good, can you tell us, like, really, do you consider the culture there and working with them there and helping maybe gender inequalities and things that are really going on in that population so that lives become more equal and better, in addition to just how can you make profits that are sustainable and feel not exploitive as a businessman?
Great question. You asked several within that. I'll address them as best I can. Concerning, using appropriate technology, you should talk with the group, that you went with in general about that. And I think that there's a recognition time and time again with development agencies that often the development agency's goal isn't completely aligned with the local community's role, but the local community, wants that development agency in their community because they see the money, or they need hope in the community, so they invite them in. And sometimes everything isn't aligned quite like you would like for it. Everybody's well intended, but it just sometimes doesn't work out quite right. You get a pitched roof instead of a flat roof that could be more useful for drying corn or drying coffee in our case. So that sometimes happens. What was the latter part of your?
I swear I'm on.
Yeah.
With Cafe Campesino, what do you guys do to make sure, that you're thinking of the community?
I'll just, been at it for 17 years, had no idea that we would end up where we have ended up in terms of our work. But I'll say this, we started with grander aspirations for change for these communities that we work in, that we're in a much more realistic place now that we're 15, 17 years into it. As I said, when we first started, we felt like you could use coffee, this product that people kind of get passionate about, and they sit around and talk while they're drinking a cup of coffee, and we thought we could use coffee basically to suck money out of the North or out of the West and transfer it down to poor countries. And we could really lift some people out of poverty by using coffee as the product. Now it's much more about if they do want a cement floor instead of the dirt floor, then let's get a couple of $100 more into the family's annual income and see if we can get that cement, purchased for the floor. Or, as I said, get the eldest daughter to school. In so many families, only one child gets to go to school. Everybody else goes to the fields and works. If you can get 2 children into school, then we consider that to be, good progress. So we've, I guess we're realistic in that this is, and we're sensitive to, are we in fact causing positive change to happen in communities when we simply take people in a van for a week who have these fancy backpacks on their back that cost more than most people make in a year. And we really do question that. We talk with teams before we take them in about what you're going to see. We're sensitive to it. At the same time, the way we kind of justify continuing to do it is coffee is going to change hands. These coffee farmers that we work with aren't usually growing coffee because they went to school and learned how to grow coffee and had this deep desire to grow coffee. They're growing coffee because it's what their dad did, it's what their granddad did, they inherited coffee land, and it's the only way they've got of earning a cash income, and it's usually less than $1,000 a year. So given that they're going to grow coffee, and that is their source of cash, our goal is to get them more cash than they would get otherwise. We think overall, with the way the world has developed, I've watched some towns literally go from a cashless to a cash economy over the last 15 years as roads come in and products start changing hands. But we think overall it's better to do that than it is to kind of leave them out there on their own. And then we hope that, maybe one day the kids don't grow coffee and the kids do get to do something else, and that they have a choice as opposed to just having to do what Dad did.
Well, the time has come to bring today's discussion to a close. I would like to thank the members of our panel for volunteering their time and expertise for this event. I would also like to thank all of the people who worked to make this event a reality, especially Dr. Camo, Bob Slinker, the Informational and Instructional Technology Department, and the faculty, staff, and administrators who have supported Panorama in various ways. Most importantly, we would like to thank you. Wait, before we get up, please. Thank you. Most importantly, we would like to thank you for being a part of the discussion. If this discussion has inspired you to want to lead or get involved with a student organization on campus related to today's topic, come down and talk with me after the event or visit the Office of Student Life. Just a little reminder, this is a Windows to the World event. So all students who attend this program may receive credit for attending this event. Please bring your GSW ID to Kenyatta or Kathy in the back after the program. You will receive a Canes Connect link to submit a short evaluation survey. You must complete the survey to get your credit. Your attendance at this program will then be listed on your academic transcript, fulfilling part of the Windows to the World graduation requirements. If you have any questions relating to the Windows to the World event, you may ask Kenyatta or visit the Office of International Programs in room 101 in the ACE building. If you have an idea for any future Panorama topics, please tweet it to us at panorama_GSW. Be safe, and we hope to see you at the next Panorama. Please don't bombard them. There's only 2 of them.